guys see the record button? No, we are recording. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar on COVID-19 recovery and reentry, technical assistance and open dialogue webinar series. And this is the first of 3. We're going to be talking about volunteer recruitment and training. And so we're so glad to have all of you with us. My name is Carol Scott, and I am the Ombudsman Specialist for the National Ombudsman Resource Center. And I am wearing a very special t-shirt today, which I hope you can see it, in commemoration of all the great volunteers that we have in the program. You will recall that you received homework. And so I'd like to invite you in the chat to list 1 or 2 of ideas and items that you plan to review or have reviewed with your volunteers. And you're encouraged to provide examples of what you plan on doing or have done to recruit and train volunteers during the pandemic, and how you are supporting them, especially as they resume in-person visits. So what we're hoping is that you will use the Q&A feature, which can be found at either the bottom or the top when you move your icon, to ask questions for the speakers. We will have time at the end to do that. And then to use the chat feature to submit any comments or respond to questions or comments that other attendees or the speakers might be asking. Also would request that at the end of this webinar, when it ends, you will be given an opportunity to complete an evaluation, and it is a very short evaluation. So I highly encourage you to to click on the evaluation questionnaire and answer those questions so that NORC can continue to provide webinars that are of interest and helpful to you in your work as advocates for residents. And there is the chat box, and there is the Q&A box. So again, questions and answers in the Q&A box, and comments and other things, especially your homework assignment of things that you want to put into the chat. One of the things I wanted to mention here is that there are 5 traits that you can be looking for your next volunteer, and passion is why your program does what it does. So finding people that share your organization's desire for change and community support is so important. Recruiting committed people kind of goes without saying. Focusing on findings and recruiting committed people will help your program retain those people over time. Recruiting reliable people, and there are a few tips for finding reliable volunteers. Ask long-term care ombudsman volunteers if they have connections that would be interested in joining. Make it easy for your current supporters to share opportunities to their connections on social media. Ask prospective volunteers for references. Find out what barriers a prospect may have before offering them a role. Talk often and strategically with your volunteers and create open communication. Recruit people with leadership skills. Leaders make great volunteers. Your program should look for recruits that possess leadership skills and are good at teaching others. Recruit team players. Great friendships and nurturing them is a great way to make an impact on your volunteer retention rate. And Katie, if you'll open up the poll, we're interested in knowing, does your program have a way for volunteers to sign up electronically? So either through social media or on a website. I think it's very important to make it as easy as possible for people to know, to find out about how what a volunteer does, but also making that first connection. So rather than emailing and having to wait back for a response, it seems to me that being able, if the person's interested right then, to get a hold of them. So those of you, okay, well, it looks like right now we're at about 54% have the, so let's end the poll and share the results. So 53% of you have a way for people to sign up electronically, and 47% do not. So those of you that do not, I just encourage you to consider seeing if there's a way on your website that you can assist people in signing up right when they're having that feeling of, oh, this is something I'd like to do or like to find out more about. So thank you very much. Our first two speakers today are Beverley Laubert and Mary Book. Beverley is the state long-term care ombudsman in Ohio. She's been there for quite a few years, 26 as the state ombudsman, but also in other positions for an additional 26 for 7 years, working on my math skills. And Mary Book is the volunteer coordinator for Region 7. And she became an ombudsman associate in 2010. So we're so excited to have the two of them, and I'm going to stop sharing and allow Bev to begin sharing. So Bev, if you and Mary will unmute, you are good to go.
Okay, are you able to see my screen, Carol?
No.
Okay, let me try again. I might have tried it too fast while you were still.
Perfect.
All right, great. Thank you. Let's see if I can get it. There we go. Thank you so much for inviting us to participate today. I'm excited to share my time with Mary Book, who is a volunteer coordinator in Southern Ohio. It's a rural area, and Mary's just done an outstanding job, and very excited to hear from her today. So Ohio has a decentralized office of the state ombudsman. So we have 12 regional programs around the state, 83 paid staff in the regional programs, and 9 in the state office. And as of yesterday, we had 241 volunteers. I'm glad that you're doing this session today, because it has obviously been challenging, but we have a great plan, and we have an outstanding core of volunteers in Ohio. And I should also give a shout out to Lorinda Johnson, who is the volunteer coordinator in our state office. So you'll hear about kind of how we built up our program. It was important for us to make an investment in volunteers. And with any kind of program or initiative, it's good to measure inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And so our volunteers and our staff are our inputs. What do we bring to the table with the desired outcome to be resident and home care consumer? In Ohio, we handle home care complaints and managed care as well. But their awareness, so that when they have a problem, they're going to call us. So our input to that is committing our volunteers and staff. Our output is having a regular presence in long-term care facilities. And then our outcome is increased complaints and awareness on the part of consumers. So it was important for us to demonstrate results. We had one program in the state in Northwest Ohio that had the most consistent long-term full-time volunteer coordinator. And we were able to identify very clearly that that investment made a world of difference in that program in terms of having a solid core of volunteers who stayed for a while. And we had regular recruitment happening, regular recognition happening, and that led to great results. So we took that experience and we approached our governor's office and our legislature about the need for increased funding to the program to make an investment that would give us an efficiently operating program. So we want volunteers, but we recognize and we made the case that volunteers aren't free. It takes resources to recruit and retain volunteers, to give them the training that they need, give them the time and the support that they need to perform in a way that helps consumers as their advocate. So this little picture here on this slide shows you an infographic that Teresa Teeple in our state office created that for each of our regional ombudsman programs to provide some information about that program and what our regular presence was like, what our resolution rate was like, to be able to show legislators who were considering the budget what we needed in order to help their constituents in long-term care facilities. And that's a critical thing to mention too, is that a lot of legislators think of, especially in my state, think of the operators of long-term care facilities as their constituents, but it's important to remind them that the people who live in those facilities are also their constituents and they vote, especially when they have good advocates making sure that they get the opportunity to vote. So we demonstrated those results. We made our budget request. We had some champions. We talked to consumers who benefited from an ombudsman. We had champions in state government. The director of the Department of Aging, for example, placed great value on the role of volunteers and the importance of the ombudsman program. And then we provided these tools like this infographic for them to go out and advocate. So we had a big increase in our funding. A couple of years ago, we went from just under $500,000 a year to now we're receiving $3.1 million a year from our state legislature to have a full-time volunteer coordinator in each of our regional programs and the volunteer coordinator in the state office. So recruitment is really about relationships, and we were able to capitalize on related stories that were happening in long-term care during the pandemic. It's been interesting, you know, nursing homes and nursing home residents have gotten more attention in the media than ever before, at least in our state. And so we were able to say, yes, these things are happening in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, and this is what we do as advocates for those residents. And we really need volunteers and more advocates for those residents. So we were able to tag on to some of those stories. One of our regional ombudsmen, Beverley Baltus here in the picture in the upper left, had developed a relationship with a particular reporter in her area in the Dayton, Ohio area, in Western Ohio. And every time there's a story about long-term care, they place a link in that story to a story that they did a few years ago solely about the Ombudsman program to inform their readers. And so they just rehash that story. Each time there's a story about long-term care, they put this link in there. There's a video of Bev talking about the role of the volunteers and why they need volunteers. So it's a continuous kind of re-upping of that message. And so having those relationships with media and others who can help you with recruitment is really important. And then Chris Steben in the lower left is the program director of our Northwest Ohio Ombudsman program. He did a personalized appeal. You know, we were all talking about how challenging it was to recruit volunteers in time of a pandemic, but we thought, why don't we take advantage of this pandemic? And so Chris did a video message, just him standing there with his hand in his pocket and I think he's wearing blue jeans and just a frank conversation saying, people need you. And what we're doing now is we need volunteers to call residents. So we weren't going into facilities at the time. So he was just frank and saying, this is what we need volunteer ombudsmen to do. We need you to call them. Do you have a family member? Do you know somebody who's living in a nursing home? You must realize how important it is then for them to have communication outside the walls of that nursing home. So please join us. So it was a great appeal. He put it on social media. And so we didn't blame the pandemic. We didn't feel victims to the pandemic. We used the pandemic to help us recruit volunteers. So we actually were pretty successful in most of our programs in continuing to add to our volunteer core. We developed some things from the state office to support our regional ombudsman in this effort. We quickly changed our certification program from in-person to online. We revised our curriculum. We assisted some of our programs. Mary's is one of them that didn't have their own access to GoToWebinar platform. So we use our GoToWebinar account and just have Mary and others use that account to provide this distance learning to their new volunteers. We provide regular guidance to our volunteer coordinators and program directors we have some tips on how to develop internships, how to recruit volunteers through internship. We have a fact sheet on how to appreciate volunteers remotely, how staff ombudsmen should be engaging volunteers. It's not all about the volunteer coordinator. Everyone has to be part of it. And we are very particular about not saying we have a volunteer ombudsman program. We have an ombudsman program and volunteers are an integral part of that. We have bi-monthly required meetings with all of our volunteer coordinators. And then Lorinda in our state office has done a great job and took initiative to have roundtable conversations, just so with no real formal agenda, just let's touch base and see how are things going in your programs. And then she also has one-on-one technical assistance calls with those volunteer coordinators to help them troubleshoot if they're running into problems. Here's just some examples of those materials that we produced from the state office. And then we have a little bit of a degree of accountability. So just as a continuous reminder about our effort and our need to continually recruit volunteers and keep them engaged and active. We have this snapshot that goes out monthly that just provides a few reminders. So the one that's coming up is about Older Americans Month, or the one here in the lower right is about Older Americans Month. And we're talking about the resilience of our volunteers, and we have some other activities going on with that. So it's a reminder of how many volunteers do we have today? How active are they? How many consumers did they reach last month? How many cases did they open because they were in touch with someone and did intake on a complaint? How many hours and so on? These are just great. We put them up on our website, send them out to our regional programs each month. So I'm going to now turn it over to Mary Book, our outstanding volunteer coordinator in Southern Ohio. Mary, if you want to unmute and take off, and I will move your slide.
Good afternoon. Okay. Yes, I'm having technical difficulty and can't be on by video, but I can be on by phone. So I want to say good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for having me. I would like to talk with you a little bit about our recruitment process and keeping our volunteers engaged. We will start with, our recruitment as far as pre-pandemic was really easy. We would just go out to community events, health fairs, Alzheimer's walks, Older Americans Month events, family fun days, concerts in the park, over 55 club meetings, and we would set up a table and talk to individuals as they approach the table and talk with them about our volunteer program. So since the pandemic started, we had to rethink some of our strategies on how to get the word out and how to, reach out to others to get interest in our volunteer program. And so we did become more dependent on social media, and we definitely are currently using, we still use, I should say, radio. We still have PSA announcements, and they do that for us on all of our local radio stations in our 10 counties. And we also have a relationship with all of the newspapers, and our outreach person with the agency, Jenny Lewis, is the one who sends out articles and PSA announcements and ads and all of that. I've been very fortunate to have someone to assist me with making all these contacts and communications. So Jenny does most of that work for us, but she does send those items out. We still receive, I want to add, we still receive the majority of our inquiries about our program through newspaper articles. And so I wanted to say, too, that we have a recruitment posters that we also have updated, and our volunteers are distributing them within their communities. And we have also expanded our outreach to utilize our agency's website and their newsletters and their Facebook page. And we currently are doing a Facebook Live event, and it is called Coffee Break with the Ombudsman. And we take maybe 10 to 20 minutes every other week to discuss the volunteer program. And we started our coffee break by first talking about general information about the program itself. And then each week we are taking a specific area of the process of becoming a volunteer and going in depth into that information and sharing that with our listeners. And we have had quite a bit of success as far as getting people to get on and listen to our Facebook Live. So we're hoping that the more that it grows, the more interest that we will see taking place with people inquiring about the volunteer program. Also, the state office, Ombudsman office, developed the virtual training, which Bev mentioned just a few minutes ago, and it's been able to have the training even during the pandemic when we couldn't do it in person. So it's made it possible for us to, we've actually completed multiple training sessions during the pandemic, and we've been able to get some volunteers certified in that process. So I also want to mention that we do have a partnership with Shawnee State University, and they have a healthcare administration program, and they also have the focus on nursing home administration. And so we have partnered with that professor, and Sarah Boley, and she sends us students to complete their practicums, and we get them. I actually have 2 starting up again, and they're completing their practicums with us. They were able to do a portion of their practicums virtually during the pandemic, and they still are able to do that. And so we are hoping that by the time that they get their virtual hours in, that we will be able to have them going into the homes and conducting some in-person visits. But we're not doing that right now with our volunteers. We're just getting started on returning back in. And so next I will talk with you about our engagement as far as keeping our volunteers during the pandemic times, the things that we've had them do. And we've started off by realizing that it was pretty challenging whenever they were not able to go into the homes and actually conduct visits as they normally did. And so at the very beginning of the pandemic, we asked our volunteers to drop off informational flyers to their assigned homes and homes within their area. And we had a lot of cooperation with our volunteers at that time. But as the pandemic worsened, we realized we were no longer able to go into the homes, and we started having our associates make telephone calls to residents and their family members or their sponsor. So they began doing this. They had a lot of success with talking with residents and family, and we feel that it has been very beneficial for everyone involved. The families have really appreciated the information that we have provided them, and they have felt more comforted knowing that there is someone else out there that's advocating for their loved one, and knowing that there wasn't anyone able to go into the homes, and still knowing that there was someone out there that still was making efforts to make sure that their loved ones did receive still a good quality of life during the pandemic and while they were in the home. Our volunteer associates also started writing personal notes to introduce themselves to the new residents who came into the homes during the pandemic. And then that ended up expanding into them writing personal notes to all of the residents and also sending holiday cards too. So they, became involved in keeping that connection with their residents that way. And we are now sending out greeting cards that the state office has provided us, and those cards contain a message from the volunteer, and it also contains the Ombudsman contact information so that the residents who will be receiving these can then also have that information on contacting the Ombudsman if they need to ask for help or talk with them about their rights. We've also been holding go-to meetings, and we also have had conference calls that we have on a regular basis with our volunteers. And staff always participate in the calls, and that way we have an opportunity to have open discussions about what's taking place within the homes, what the volunteers are doing, and just being able to stay connected with our volunteers. And each associate is assigned an Ombudsman specialist, and so the staff orient the new volunteers to their homes by, we have had some actually doing virtual advocacy visits with them, and this allows the associate to be introduced to the staff and the residents so that they can actually see the person. And so that makes it easier for and the associate to be more recognizable whenever we return into the homes and take back up doing visits. And this also gives the volunteer the opportunity to be introduced to the staff at the home. And as long as it takes, and as many visits as it takes, we will continue to do the virtual visits with them until they feel that they are confident in conducting those visits on their own. So that has also been very helpful for our new associates. And also even our regular volunteers that have been with us for quite a while. The Ombudsman specialists also try to involve the associates in their cases by including them in the investigation process. And we are beginning to see more of our volunteers show an interest in returning to in-person visits and going back and seeing the residents in their homes. So they will be actually doing this on a person-by-person basis and going through all the training and everything to be able to return to in-person visits. But those are the things that we have tried to do to keep our associates engaged and active and connected with our team.
Thanks,
And
Mary.
that's all I have, Bev.
Great, thank you. Great job. I'm very proud of Southern Ohio. Just today I was reviewing our monitoring report for the program and kept finding myself writing, is a leader, is a leader, is a leader. So great job. We're very proud of you. And Carol, I think that's it for us.
Great. Thank you so much, Bev and Mary. And as Natasha gets her PowerPoint up, Mary, it's been asked if you could share a copy of one of your newsletters so that other people might be able to take that to their sponsoring agency and ask for similar space to put articles in their newsletters. So if you could send me a copy of that, we will send it out to everybody. So it's my pleasure at this time to introduce Natasha Adams. She is a volunteer recruitment specialist with the Oregon Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program and is a lifelong believer in volunteering, having been a volunteer in many programs herself, but I think fairly new to the Ombudsman program, but from what I understand, has hit the ground running. And so I'm real excited to have Natasha share what they're doing in Oregon.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. For those of you on the West Coast, everybody else, good afternoon. As Carol said, I'm relatively new to the Ombudsman's program. I've been at the Oregon program for a little over 3 years now, but we really have a lot of great support, and there was an amazing foundation when we came in. So when I say we, I'm full-time, and then we have a half-time volunteer recruiter. Her name is Carol, and we actually started on the same day, which if you're ever able to do that, was amazing because we learned everything and really were able to create a great team starting out. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background just to kind of let you know how the Oregon program works so that you can translate how it might work for your program. And I'll also say that a majority of what I'm going to talk about is the actual recruitment piece versus the retention and management. But if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. So in Oregon, our program was established in 1981 with the Older Americans Act. We are an independent state agency, and we answer only to the governor's office. We have approximately 45,000 long-term care residents and about 685 facilities in the state. You can see from the slide that our agency, compared to the size of the state, is relatively small. We have 16 staff, and on average have between 145 to 160 volunteers. And the hours of volunteer time here hurts my heart a little bit, because it is about 3 times less what it was pre-pandemic. So our volunteers were clocking in over 20,000 hours of volunteer time, and the pandemic put a damper on that quite a bit. But it has also, as you'll see, given us a lot of opportunities as well. So for us, this is the state of Oregon. We divide the state into 9 districts, and each district has its own staff person, which we refer to as a deputy. So our main office is located in Salem, and our state ombudsman and agency director is Fred Steele. And he oversees, of course, the entire agency. And what you see here are our deputies, and our deputies' responsibility are not only to oversee the facilities in their district, but also to manage the volunteers in their district. And so, you know, I'm in communication with them all the time, and I see the numbers, and I tend to kind of prioritize depending on what the need is. So, you know, if I have one district where there's 10 facilities and 0 volunteers, of course, I'm going to focus my efforts there more than on a district that maybe has 70% of their facilities covered. It gets a bit tricky when you have an entire state and 2 of us that are recruiting. And so we have to prioritize. And what has been interesting with the pandemic, we have received a lot of additional funds for recruitment, and has made the recruiting actually a lot easier than it's been in the past. So just a little bit more about our program. Folks that are interested in becoming an ombudsman, they fill out an application. Our applications can be printed from our website. They can be completed online. We mail them to people. Some people have us fax them, and we can email them as well. So basically, if you want an application, we will get it to you. Prior to my starting at the agency, we were very paper focused. We did very little things electronically. One of the first things that Carol and I did was to create an online form. And we use a program, it's called Jot Forms. And I promise at the end, there's a page of all these resources. You can use it for free. We pay for it, so we have a few more features, but it is very user-friendly. And when someone submits an application, it now comes directly to my email inbox. And it has made applications, I just can't even describe how much easier it is. And so once we get that application, we interview folks, either Carol or I do it, or we have volunteers who are part of a recruitment and screening committee, and they sometimes help interview volunteers. It depends on how active the committee is in the community. We then do criminal records checks, and then we do the training and certification. And then once the training is over, the volunteer recruiters, we hand over the volunteers to their deputies. And one of the things that has been interesting, as I said, we were very paper focused before the pandemic. For trainings, we were also always in the classroom. We were really strict about how many people minimum. So we would say we need at least 3 people to be in a training for it to be cost effective. And we would do them in each community. So if we had 2 people that applied to be a volunteer, and there wasn't a third, it might take a year before we host a training in their community. So with, no matter how much Carol and I said, we got to do some of this online, there was a lot of resistance to it, because that's not how things had been done in the past. And the pandemic really forced us to take this technology leap. And it has really been great in that now we don't have to wait. We've actually hosted a training every month since October, and we've been able to have between 8 and 12 volunteers come to those trainings. So we actually have doubled our recruitment numbers during the pandemic versus prior to the pandemic. And I think offering these online trainings has a lot to do with that. The onboarding is directly with their deputy. So the volunteer actually meets their deputy now. We do, before the training starts, we call it a meet and greet, and it's about an hour long. And all the soon to be trained volunteers get on Zoom along with the deputies. Everybody introduces themselves, and we go over Zoom and make sure everybody feels comfortable. And then we start the training the next week. And during that meet and greet is when they get to sort of see their deputy for the first time. And then once the training's over, they're contacted by their deputy, and the deputy onboards them, which includes assignment to a facility. They used to do facility visits, which depending on our level of risk in the state, we are allowed to go to some facilities, not to others, depending on which county you're looking at. And so the onboarding is a little bit different. We're doing a lot of the facility type visits over Zoom. All right, so that's kind of the program in a nutshell, and I'm going to dive into the recruitment part of it now. So you may know of the rule of 7, and the rule of 7 really applied to I would even say pre-cable, not even pre-social media. So when folks were watching TV and reading newspapers, if they saw something about your organization 7 times, they would begin to retain it and then potentially apply to be a volunteer. So now, with the advent of everything being around all the time and you being bombarded with information, I like to say it's now the rule of 77. And so what you're really needing to do, and I think you'll notice moving forward in this presentation, that we try a lot of things because we know it takes a lot of touch points for someone to become interested. So, you need to make them aware that you exist. You need to demonstrate the need that you need for volunteers, and also the need for advocacy, right? We need volunteers but we also need volunteers. And they really have to like or trust your organization. Part of this rule of 77 is at educating them about what you do and why the service that you provide is vital. So we really focus on that we're free and confidential, and also the level of professionalism among our staff and our volunteers. You're also looking at, do they get what they pay for, right? We ask our volunteers to have 40 hours of training before they can start. Is their time worth what they're going to receive at the end? And I think in order to remain a volunteer, you have to feel like you're making a difference, and it has to be rewarding. It can be difficult and challenging, which this volunteer position is, as we all know, but there has to be, an equilibrium of their time and into what they get out of it. So of course, time is part of it. They have to understand how much time you're going to ask for them to volunteer. We tell them up front we need a year's commitment, and we ask that they do about 4 hours a week. I would say on average, our volunteers stay between 5 to 7 years. We do have one volunteer that is clocking in at her 27th year, which is fantastic, and she's amazing. We also have to be able to provide them choices. This is something that we struggle with a little bit as an agency, in that we are very definitive on what sort of time commitment we want from people, and that they need to be able to go to the facilities when the administration is there. So if someone works full time and they're willing to volunteer on the weekends, we try to give them a different choice. Maybe they would like to help with recruitment or volunteer in a different capacity, because our agency believes they need to be able to be present when administration is there, and be able to attend specific meetings that the facility might be having. And then, of course, the rule of 77 is, are they going to remember you? So doing memorable things, but again, having touch points in many different areas. So let's jump into that a little bit. So for us, this is sort of what we've always done versus trying new things. And also everything is dictated by money. I've been in nonprofits for close to 20 years now, and it's always been dictated by money. And it doesn't matter that you're a state agency. And so pre-pandemic, we really were operating from a volunteer recruitment perspective on a shoestring budget. We were finding a lot of free things, whether it's volunteer fairs or senior fairs. We really relied on Facebook a lot. We weren't paying to use anything on Facebook like ads. We were just constantly posting and connecting with other organizations online. And then we did a lot of distribution of flyers. We would hang them in senior centers and libraries. If you could hang up a flyer, we would do it. And our volunteers would help distribute them as well. Then when we had COVID hit and the CARES Act money came through, our budget became this dream thing that we could never have imagined. And funnily enough, Carol and I kept a list, a wish list, a dream list. If we ever got the money, here are the things we want to try. And if you take anything away from my presentation today, I want you to know that it's okay to try and it's okay to fail, because you don't know unless you try. And there are lots of things that we tried that resulted potentially, we couldn't track that it resulted in any volunteers, but I will always argue for touch points. So you can see here under the miscellaneous, one of the things that we tried because of the pandemic and people eating out more, we contacted businesses, specifically pizza places that did deliveries, and asked them to stick our volunteer recruitment flyer on top of their takeout boxes. So when you got a pizza delivered, you got a flyer about our need for volunteers. As far as I can tell, that didn't result in any volunteers. I think we distributed over 40,000 flyers. But our volunteer recruitment has gone up during the pandemic, so who knows? But again, don't be afraid to try it. Because it may work out. Another thing, these bus ads, we thought we would have to pay to put ads in all the public transportation buses in Salem. I called and asked, and they said, oh, well, you're like a nonprofit, we'll give it to you for free. So just making that phone call and connection and telling them what you do often can result in something larger than you may anticipate. So I'm going to talk a little bit about newspapers. For us specifically, if we have a newspaper article published, if the story is dire, you know, X happened in a facility and it was really bad because, and then our link is at the bottom, we are going to get anywhere from 5 to 10 volunteers out of that article. If it's a feel-good article, like, hey, we have this really great volunteer and here's what they do, we may get 1 or maybe 2. And then, you know, we send press releases out to, I created an Excel spreadsheet with every newspaper in the state, along with who to contact for press releases. And then we send out press releases. We pay for ads now, which we did in the past, like for volunteer guides. We're doing that more now in newspapers. And one thing that worked really well that we only started recently was we noticed that if our volunteers reached out to their local newspaper, things were much more likely to get published. And so we created a template for a letter to the editor. It had all the information in it. And then we gave it to all our volunteers, and they kind of added their pieces to it, their name, maybe a story about why they like to volunteer. And then they sent that to their local editor. And we had quite a few published from that. And it was because they didn't come from Salem. They didn't come from me. So reaching out to your volunteers for help, I think they're usually pretty happy to help when they can. So Facebook, during the pandemic, Facebook has been our biggest bang for the buck. If we post something and boost it, we are going to get a lot of people coming to us from Facebook. So we use Facebook for a variety of things. We post other organizations' information. We tell them what we're up to. If we've done a presentation somewhere, we'll let folks know. If we are offering a training, we post that as an event so people can see what our trainings look like. If we get recognition for some reason, we will post that as well. If we're in the news, so for instance here, our ombudsman's getting vaccinated, we'll post that. And then we also will post videos, and depending on time, I'll show you this video at the end, but it is, again, it's another resource that's free. It's called Powtoon, and you can create cartoon-like videos, and we created one to recruit volunteers. All right, so here are my tidbits for Facebook. If you post something on Facebook, always put an image with it. If you're posting an image of your volunteer, of course, you want to make sure you have permission to do that. We actually have included permission to use photos in our application. So they check, yes, you can use my photo, no, you can't. And then we keep track of that. You will often find too that if other organizations are telling you about an event, they send you their flyer in PDF. Well, you can't post PDFs on Facebook, so you have to convert them to JPEG. So either ask them to give it to you in a picture form if you want to partner with them, or there are, you can convert them. But again, it gives you a picture when you are trying to tell your community about an educational program that another organization might be offering. The videos I mentioned, it's great to have moving images that really captures people's attention on Facebook. And you always want to make sure that you include your links so that they can go where you want them to go. So quite often, anytime I post anything, at the very end of my post, I'll say something along the lines of, if this has piqued your curiosity, or now you know how much we need volunteers, there is always a link to our application. I shouldn't say always, in the majority of our posts, there is a link. I also just wanted to, I don't know what people's level of, I guess, literacy is on Facebook, but just pointing out that your hashtags and @ and how to use them. When you use a hashtag, it means someone can find that post by searching your hashtag. So you can see here, Jimmy Kimmel, not Jimmy Kimmel, I can't remember his name, but he is a nighttime host, and he will say #myworstbirthday, and then folks will put in a description of what their worst birthday was, and then they can find those and share them. So just an example. And then on Facebook, if you use the @ symbol and start to type in a person or another organization, it will actually pull up their link in your comments so that whoever's looking at it can click on that and directly go to this other person's Facebook. So for us, using Facebook prior to the pandemic was relatively new. And the biggest thing to understand is you can have the best Facebook page ever and you can post every day, but if you don't have any followers on Facebook, it's not going to result in anything. So paying to boost an ad, for $50, we can reach close to 2,000 people. So it's really affordable for the reach you have. And Facebook also allows you to put in demographics. So you can be specific to an area, you can be specific to an age group, you can even put in keywords so that if someone often talks about volunteering on their Facebook page, this ad is going to get directed towards them because you've put volunteer in as a keyword. So really working on that social media presence. You know, some people love Facebook, some people hate it, but when it comes to recruitment, it really is a really vital and important tool. It also has brought in a greater age range for us. The majority of our volunteers are retired, and they continue to be that way, but a lot of them now are on the younger end of the retirement spectrum. And so that has been really interesting. So we, of course, have done a lot of different kinds of outreach, very similar to what Ohio was saying. We do the volunteer and senior fairs. We actually are still doing those. Some people are offering them virtually. I don't think they have as much of an impact, but we are trying to participate in them when possible. We always gave presentations to service organizations and we would reach out to them. We are still doing that because they're still having their meetings, but they're doing it over Zoom. So we will ask to do a presentation. We also give presentations to local government. So I will try throughout the year to hit our major cities, and I reach out to city council and I say, hey, I'd love to give you a presentation about what our agency does and what we can do for your community. And a lot of those are shown live on Facebook, or the local newspaper covers it. And always making local government aware of what you do is important, but it is a recruitment tool, I think, that isn't used as often. And then of course there's local events. Prior to COVID, we would go to a lot of really random local events. They wouldn't always be focused on volunteers. So for instance, in the little community I live in the summertime, they do music in the park every Friday night. So I would walk around with my flyers and give a flyer to every person, and we'd hit 2,000 people in one day. So I think not being afraid, right, to put yourself out there. And volunteers also, your volunteers go to events like that, and you can give them the stack of flyers and have them pass it out. Personally, I like to be identifiable. If I'm going to do that, I'm going to try and wear a shirt, even that says volunteer on the back, even though I'm not, but something so people know why I'm walking up to them. All right, so this specifically was on our dream list that I mentioned earlier. We always wanted to send direct mail. And for those of you that are familiar, there are companies that do this, and they have access to the demographics and people's mailing addresses. And this was something we just could never afford to do. And because of the CARES Act money, we were able to work with an organization, and they designed a postcard for us. And then we were able to tell them which communities specifically we wanted to target. We initially targeted communities that had really high rates of COVID, specifically in long-term care facilities. But we sent these to homes, not to long-term care facilities. So we were hoping to get to family members, for them to understand that we are there as a resource. But of course, we also added that we need volunteers. And this was huge for us. We went from maybe getting 4 applicants a month. When we sent this out the next month, we had 32 applicants. So that direct piece to somebody's home really made a huge difference. And again, it's similar to Facebook. You can choose demographics. So you can choose income, home ownership or not, certain zip codes. So if you have facilities in a certain zip code that need more volunteers than a different one, you really can focus it to be able to do that. The other thing we were able to do that we hadn't been able to do in the past was to create a PSA. So we created a 30-second PSA that went on TV across the state. And it was an informational PSA. Here's what our agency does. Here's how we can help you. Please call us if you have concerns for a loved one, or you yourself are living in a facility and have a concern. We then also created a 3-minute video, and we used that specifically on social media, and it's on our website, and it speaks specifically to what our volunteers do and why we need volunteers. And then because you automatically have audio when you create a video, the company that made these for us for the 30-second TV PSA pulled the audio for us, and we were then able to give that to radio stations. And many radio stations will play PSAs at no cost. We also did an additional video around the holidays, thanking specifically essential workers in long-term care facilities, and that one we did in both English and Spanish. I would highly encourage you to create a YouTube channel. It sounds kind of scary. I want to point out to you that, as tech savvy as I may appear, that our YouTube channel only has 23 subscribers. So I point that out because I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. We don't necessarily try to get people to our channel. What we're trying to do is provide resources. So for instance, now that we do our trainings on Zoom, we record them. I then upload them to our channel and provide that link to all our new volunteers. some who maybe just want to look at the training again, others who are currently in the training, maybe they need to review something. But it has allowed us to put things up that are public. And so you are welcome to find our channels. So if you go onto YouTube and type LTCO into the search bar, you should be able to find us and be able to see some of these PSAs that I've been telling you about. All right, so we've hit this miscellaneous category. I'm not sure how much time I have left, but we did try movie ads before the pandemic. Our movie theaters have pretty reasonable prices in regards to putting your ad up before the movie. That was relatively successful. We do utility bill inserts. A lot of communities will do that for free if you provide the flyer for them. We also make sure to email our legislators when we have a volunteer who has graduated and is now an official certified ombudsman. We email them to let them know someone in their district has committed to this, and many do send some sort of recognition, others don't, but it's good to make them aware. We also made yard signs for the first time, and they were thank you yard signs. So the yard signs, let me see, actually, I think I have pictures here. So sorry, these were our handouts that we put on the pizza boxes. These are what our utility inserts looked like. And then we created these yard signs, and we reached out to the volunteers and let them know we were coming. If they didn't want the sign, please let us know, because some folks don't want the recognition or they don't want others to know that they are the local ombudsman. But they just said best volunteer ever and thank you. And of course, primarily this was a thank you retention tool, but it also meant their neighbors are going to ask them, where do you volunteer? What do you do? And so it did have this underlying point of recruitment as well. And the volunteers that wanted them really loved them. And it was really fun to drive around and stick them in their yard and for them to have those. I think Ohio mentioned that they were doing personal outreach. This is something else we did or are doing during the pandemic. Our volunteers get personalized postcards. So they provide me with a photo that they want to use. And then I create these. They tell me how many they want. We ship them to that volunteer and they drop them off at the facility. And that way they can introduce themselves to the residents there. And these have proven to be really helpful, especially because of the picture, because once the facilities started to open up again, the residents at least recognized their ombudsman. And we also sent out holiday postcards to every resident in long-term care during the holiday season. And it was just we're here for you. If you need us, here's what we do. And we did send those to every facility with a letter from Fred, our agency director, telling them they were to give these to the residents. And this actually resulted in a really significant uptake in calls to our office in regards to reporting concerns. So like I said earlier, please try things. Don't be afraid to fail. One of the things we tried pre-pandemic, I tried to start a book club. I was thinking about how do we engage some of our local community members? And this book in particular speaks to an aging individual. And it's a very recognizable book. People love this book. And we had grand ideas about having the community read this book. And then we would do local book club, conversations. And then we were going to show the movie. And I think we had 2 people participate. So this was one that, we scrapped and said, okay, this didn't work. But again, we tried it, and it meant we reached out to some local libraries who in turn have continued to share our information. Another thing that we tried, which actually was successful, when the pandemic first hit, we created Love from a Distance, and we provided folks with this template. It was just a blank piece of paper that had the heart and love from a distance. And we told people if they filled them out, we would get them to local long-term care facilities. And we also posted them on our Facebook page. And these were really fantastic. We had adults fill them out. We had a lot of kids fill them out. And I think it really did bring a little bit of joy during a very horrible time for a lot of residents. Let's see. So you have access to the PowerPoint. So I wanted to let you know, these are some of the things that I talked about. There are lots of free resources. This PowerPoint presentation, I did not make it. I'm not that fancy. I used Slide Carnival. They have fantastic PowerPoint slides. You can change them to put your logo on, but that really is a great resource for doing presentations. And as basic and silly as it sounds, don't be afraid to use Google. There are often things that I think I know how to do, and so I Google in, how do I XYZ in PowerPoint? And that's how I've learned to do, I would say 90% of what I know how to do from a technological standpoint. So I know I'm running low on time, so I'm going to skip the video that you can watch. But the biggest thing I want to tell you is I end every presentation by saying we need volunteers. And if you know anyone that is great at volunteering, send them my way. And I would love to talk with them. So I'm happy to answer any questions via email as well if we do run out of time. I really enjoy what I do, and I hope I've been able to give you some hints and tips to help you recruit some volunteers.
Tasha, thank you, thank you, thank you. We've been getting a lot of thumbs up and great ideas in the chat. I will just mention, if you are chatting, be sure that you're clicking the all panelists and attendees if you want your message to go out to everybody. So while I'm bringing up my slides, one of the questions that has come up is the volunteers using their own personal phones and reluctance. And I think Bev or Mary and Natasha, we need to keep the answers very short in order to get through. So
so our volunteers are the same. There's a service through Google. It's free. It's a Google phone number. They can get a Google phone number for free, and it will forward whatever number they put in from the Google number to their number. So that's actually what we encourage ours to do. And we created a tutorial on how to get a Google phone number, which I can share, but that's my 2 cents.
Bev or Mary?
Nope,
Okay,
I
I was
think
going to
that's a
say,
great idea.
yeah, I think there's also a way on your phone to block sending what your phone number is.
Yeah, you can do *67, but a lot of people won't answer. I mean, if I get a call like that, I don't answer it.
That's a good point. Good point.
Sorry, the great thing about Google is you can choose, it'll give you a local zip code. So if your cell phone is from New York and you live in Oregon, that alone, I think it makes people answer the phone more.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So just a reminder that the Points of Light conference is coming up in July. And if you register by the 30th, it's only $99. And I'm wondering if people would want to chat into panelists and everyone. Are you aware of other volunteer management conferences, webinars, resources that you use so that we can make sure that everybody has really good ideas of where they can go to get information? You know, it seems to me that kind of the bottom line of what both Bev, Mary, and Natasha have said is you've got to ask. And you got to ask over and over and over. So just a reminder that that not only the volunteer coordinator, but every person in the program, every volunteer, every staff person needs to be conscious when they're having a conversation with anybody. They need to talk about the program and ask. The Wyoming program just finished a partnership or is in the middle of a partnership with their AARP, and in their March 2021 newsletter, they did an article about the program. They did an article about the program, and got a lot of requests and interest. And so I'm wondering if you would want to put into the chat, who have you partnered with? Organizations or community places. The yard signs, so a copy of the Ohio yard sign, and in Louisiana, they made bookmarks to thank their volunteers. And this is a bunch of resources. This is the onboarding representative toolkit. So you can find examples of welcome letters, interview questions, conflict of interest forms, acknowledgement forms, and there's on this page, Ombudsman support volunteer. There is a ton of ideas on recruitment, retention, getting started, and on and on and on. So, Natasha, direct mail, total costs and numbers reached. You're muted if you're talking. Natasha?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Number of direct mail pieces and the cost.
So we spent 25,000 on our first mailing, and it reached, I think, 20,000. I can share that. I have a breakdown. Carol, I can share that with you if you want to share it with people later.
That would be great. And then when you guys are, this is open to all three of you, when you're marketing the volunteers to the consumers, public, legislators, how do you describe the responsibilities, activities, and outcomes of the volunteer?
Well, in Ohio, we provide data about things like how many cases and complaints that came to our attention because of a volunteer, and then resolution rate. We, write letters to legislators. We're doing that now, in fact, to say one of your constituents is providing great value to your constituents who live in long-term care facilities, and we provide the volunteer's name and how long they've been with us, how many hours they've contributed, and so on. And then then that kind of opens the door for us then to talk to that legislator about long-term care issues in general and things that they ought to care about.
We do the same. We create an infographic. We also, when COVID isn't a thing, every other year have a legislative day, and we pay for all of our volunteers, to those who are interested, to go to the state capitol, and we set up meetings for them to meet directly with their legislators, and they go with their infographic, and they have this personal, here's what we do, and here's, we give them talking points of what we are trying to accomplish, and those are really impactful when they can actually talk to them.
Katie's been, Katie Kohler is also with the National Ombudsman Resource Center. She's been monitoring the chat. Katie, were there some questions?
Yes, there were a few that came in. So one was, do you have a separate Facebook page for volunteers, or is there a state page or one for the AAA? How does that work?
So we have an agency Facebook page. I've been lobbying for a private page for our volunteers for them to communicate. Haven't quite got there yet. There's a lot of, what if they talk about things, what if someone makes a suggestion that that isn't the way we should do things. But in all honesty, you have someone monitor the group and it's not that big of an issue. But I think it's a good idea to have a private one for your volunteers so they can communicate.
Thanks. So there were a couple more that came in. So how do your programs handle providing training on the evenings and weekends?
We just do it. I don't know if Mary wants to comment, because I know Mary has done that as well. I think it's important, the volunteers are our customers, and good customer service, in order for us to get value from them, we need to provide value. And so we do what we need to meet their needs.
I agree.
Yes, I will say that we do offer the trainings whenever it's convenient for the trainee. So if it would be evenings, if it would be weekends. I know in the past I have done weekend trainings, and we have, scheduled it around, our working hours. I just do it whenever it needs to be done. So yes, we're there for the volunteer, and we want to make it as easy and convenient for them as possible.
I'm
Thanks.
trying to convince them that weekend trainings are a great idea. So I'll show them the webinar.
And the last question that I had was if your volunteers can be assigned to more than one facility.
Yes, ours can.
I'm in Ohio.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Mary, Natasha, Bev, thank you so much. I think you overloaded people with ideas, and I think people were scrambling to take down all the resources they want. They want copies of everything so that they can, as we say in the Ombudsman world, we want to share from you. So I just want to thank you, and just say that if there's anything that you mentioned today that you didn't already share a copy with, if you could send that to us in the next day, we will include the links to those in the email that will go out, that will have the recording of the link to the recording. I just want to mention that this is the first of 3 webinars. So I hope that you will join us in 2 weeks for a conversation about communicating with residents, how you've done it, how it's been done in the past year, how it's kind of moving into the reentry phase. And then our last webinar will be on complaint handling when we couldn't get in, and then how things are kind of changing. So I'm getting lots and lots of great information, thanks and stuff. So we're going to end it here. Again, Bev, Natasha, Mary, thank you, and Katie, thank you so much. And to all of you that are listening and watching, thank you for what you do. I hope that the news in the next month is that you recruited a new volunteer, and that you're getting ready to do the training for them. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye, and thank you.